The autumn night of 1968 had settled over Los Angeles like a heavy blanket. In the heart of Chinatown, on the second floor of a weathered brick building, a single bare bulb cast harsh shadows across a small gymnasium. The smell of old leather, dried sweat, and tiger balm liniment hung in the air. A heavy bag swayed gently on its chain. Still moving from recent impact, Bruce Lee moved through the empty space like a ghost, his bare feet whispering against the worn wooden floorboards. If you want to discover what happened when the most destructive puncher in the world met the fastest man alive, and why this night became one of the most shocking encounters in combat sports history, stay until the end. You won't regret it. He was alone, as he preferred during these late-night sessions. Bruce had been training for nearly 3 hours, pushing his body through sequences that would exhaust most men in minutes. His shirtless torso glistened with sweat, every muscle fiber visible beneath skin that seemed almost too thin to contain such explosive potential. He paused mid-movement, sensing something before hearing it, a change in the air pressure. The creak of the old staircase outside, the door opened slowly, and the light from the hallway was immediately blocked by a silhouette so massive it seemed to fill the entire frame. The figure stood there for a long moment, unmoving, unspeaking, just watching. George Foreman stepped into the gymnasium, and the room itself seemed to grow smaller. At 6 feet 3 inches and 220 pounds of pure destructive machinery. He was a physical specimen unlike any other in boxing. Just months earlier, he had won the Olympic gold medal in Mexico City, standing over his fallen opponent with an American flag. At only 19 years old, his professional record already showed 18 victories, 16 of them by knockout. Men didn't just lose to George Foreman. They were destroyed by him, broken, carried out on stretchers. Unlike Muhammad Ali's dancing charisma or quick-witted banter, Foreman possessed a different kind of presence. He rarely spoke. He didn't need to. His eyes did the talking, flat and cold, measuring everything with the patience of a predator. When George Foreman walked into a room, conversations stopped. When he looked at a man, that man felt the weight of his own mortality. Behind Foreman stood Angelo Dundee, one of boxing's most respected trainers. Angelo had worked with Ali, had seen the best fighters in the world, and had heard the whispers about a martial artist in Chinatown who moved in ways that defied explanation. He had arranged this meeting, though Foreman had needed little convincing. The young champion was curious, in his own way, to see what all the talk was about. Bruce turned to face his visitors, his expression calm, unreadable. He made no move to bow or extend a greeting. He simply stood there, watching Foreman with the same intensity that Foreman was watching him. This is him. Foreman's voice was low, rough, carrying the texture of gravel. 2 words. No greeting. No pretense. Angelo nodded. This is Bruce Lee, George, the one I told you about. Foreman's eyes moved slowly across Bruce's frame, taking in the compact musculature, the relaxed stance, the utter lack of fear in those dark eyes. He was accustomed to seeing fear. Every opponent he had ever faced showed it eventually, sometimes in the locker room, sometimes in the ring, but always before the end. This small man showed nothing. You don't look like much, Foreman said flatly. Bruce allowed a small smile to cross his face. Neither does water. Until it floods a city. The gymnasium fell silent. Angelo shifted uncomfortably near the door, sensing the tension building like pressure before a storm. Foreman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, perhaps, or the beginning of irritation. Foreman walked slowly toward the heavy bag that hung in the corner. Each footstep heavy, the wooden floorboards groaning under his weight. He stopped in front of it, rolled his massive shoulders, and without any warning, drove his right fist into the leather. The sound was like a thunderclap in the small space. The bag didn't swing. It compressed violently, then flew backward as if struck by a car, the chain screaming in protest. The ceiling beam groaned. Foreman turned back to Bruce, his face expressionless. That's power. That's what ends fights. What do you have that can stop that? Bruce hadn't moved during the display. His breathing remained steady, his posture unchanged. I wouldn't try to stop it, he replied calmly. I simply wouldn't be there when it arrived. A sound escaped Foreman's throat, something between a grunt and a laugh. Wouldn't be there. I've heard that before. They all think they can run. Nobody runs fast enough. There's a difference between running and flowing. Bruce moved away from the center of the room, his steps light, almost floating. Water doesn't run from the rock. It flows around it. Be water, my friend. The rock stands firm, proud of its strength. The water moves past, untouched. Years later, the rock is worn to nothing. The water remains. Foreman's jaw tightened. Philosophy. He had no use for philosophy. He had fists that could collapse a man's ribs, that could turn faces into unrecognizable masks of blood and swelling. That was his philosophy. That was all he had ever needed. "I destroy men twice your size," Foreman said, taking a step toward Bruce. "I've put heavyweights in hospitals. What are you, 140 pounds? I could kill you with one punch." "One?" Bruce met his gaze without flinching. "You could, if you could land it." The challenge hung in the air between them. Angelo Dundee pressed himself against the wall, suddenly aware that he might be about to witness something unprecedented, or something terrible. Foreman moved with surprising speed for a man his size, closing the distance between them in 2 massive strides. His right hand shot forward, a jab that carried enough force to crack bone. The punch cut through empty air. Bruce had shifted his head perhaps 3 inches, no more, and the fist passed harmlessly by his temple. Foreman's eyes widened slightly. He threw another punch, harder this time, a straight right that would have ended any fight it connected with. Again, Bruce moved just enough. Not a dramatic dodge, not a desperate leap backward. Just a subtle shift, like smoke disturbed by a passing hand. The young champion unleashed a combination of left hook, right cross, left uppercut, each punch thrown with Olympic-level precision, each carrying the power that had earned him his nickname. Each one found nothing but air. 30 seconds passed. 40 Foreman was throwing everything he had, his breath coming harder now, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead and drip down his temples. His white shirt had begun to stick to his massive frame. Bruce moved through the storm of fists like water flowing between rocks, never rushing, never panicking, simply not being where the punches arrived. Each devastating blow found only empty space where Bruce had been a millisecond before. When Foreman finally stopped, his chest heaving, Bruce stood exactly where he had started. He hadn't retreated a single step, hadn't moved backward at all. He had simply flowed around every attack while maintaining his ground. How? Foreman's voice was hoarse. "Nobody moves like that. Nobody." "You telegraph," Bruce said quietly. "Your shoulder drops before the jab. Your weight shifts before the cross. Your eyes focus on where you want to hit. By the time your fist begins to move, I've already read the message and written my response." Foreman stared at him, something shifting behind those cold eyes. For the first time in his fighting career, he had faced an opponent he couldn't touch. Not because the man was faster, not entirely, but because the man understood movement in a way Foreman had never encountered. "My turn," Bruce said, "not to hit you, to show you something." He turned to Angelo Dundee. "Would you hold the pad for me?" Angelo stepped forward hesitantly, taking the thick leather striking pad that Bruce offered. He positioned it against his chest, bracing himself as he had done for countless fighters over the years. Bruce positioned himself directly in front of Angelo, so close that his extended fist barely touched the pad's surface. 1 inch of distance, perhaps less. Foreman frowned. "What is this? You can't hit from there. There's no space, no leverage, no power without distance." Bruce didn't respond. His body seemed to relax completely, every muscle releasing tension. Then, in a fraction of a second that seemed to exist outside of normal time, something happened. A small movement, a compression, an explosion. Angelo Dundee, a man who had absorbed punches from heavyweight champions while holding pads, stumbled backward 6 feet. The sound of the impact echoed off the walls like a gunshot. Angelo stood there, wide-eyed, one hand pressed against his sternum. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his voice shaking slightly. That was like getting kicked by a mule. From 1 inch. I've held pads for Ali, for Frazier, for every heavyweight you can name. Nothing felt like that. Nothing even came close. Foreman stood frozen. His mind, trained to understand power as a function of mass and distance and wind-up, could not process what he had just witnessed. Every principle he had built his fighting career on had just been contradicted by a man half his size. The word came out barely above a whisper. "Power doesn't come from size," Bruce explained, his breathing completely normal. "It comes from efficiency, From focusing every ounce of energy through a single point at a single moment, your punches are powerful because you're big, because you have mass and leverage. My punch is powerful because nothing is wasted. Every part of my body contributes to that single point of impact. Foreman looked down at his own massive fists, weapons that had destroyed every opponent they had ever touched. For the first time, he saw their limitation. They were powerful, yes, but they were also predictable, telegraphed, dependent on distance and wind dash up. The silence stretched between them. Angelo remained against the wall, still rubbing his chest, still processing the force that had come from such impossible proximity. Finally, Foreman spoke. I've never met anyone who could do what you just did. I've never met anyone who could avoid me like that, not even close. Power is a tool, Bruce said. You have more of it than almost anyone alive. But a tool without control is just a danger to everyone, including its owner. Foreman's eyes dropped to the floor. When he looked up again, something had changed in his expression. The cold flatness was still there, but beneath it, visible for the first time, was genuine curiosity, perhaps even humility. The words seemed to cost him something. George Foreman did not ask for help. George Foreman did not admit that anyone had anything to teach him. In locker rooms across America, men trembled at the mention of his name. And here he was, asking a man 60 pounds lighter to share his knowledge. Not the fancy stuff, but the control, how to use what I have better. Bruce studied the young champion for a long moment. He saw past the intimidating exterior, past the reputation for destruction, to something underneath. Potential, raw, undisciplined, but genuine potential. Power without control is just violence, Bruce said. Violence without purpose is just destruction. You have the power of a hurricane, George, but a hurricane destroys without discrimination. Learn to be the river instead. The river has power too, but it chooses its path. It shapes the landscape over time rather than devastating it in a moment. They talked until the first gray light of dawn began seeping through the gymnasium's single window. Bruce demonstrated principles of economy, of efficiency, of channeling force through relaxation rather than tension. Foreman, for his part, showed Bruce the mechanics of his devastating combinations. Two masters from different worlds, sharing knowledge as equals. As Foreman and Angelo prepared to leave, the young champion paused at the door. He turned back to Bruce, his massive frame silhouetted against the morning light. You could have hit me, Foreman said. All those times I was swinging, you could have put your hands on me. Why didn't you? Bruce smiled. Because I had nothing to prove, and neither did you. We both already knew what we could do. Tonight was about learning what we couldn't do. That's where growth lives, George. Not in our strengths, but in our limitations. Foreman nodded slowly. For the first time that night, something resembling a smile crossed his usually stoic face. The river, not the hurricane. I'll remember that. In the years that followed, George Foreman would become the heavyweight champion of the world, eventually facing Muhammad Ali in the legendary Rumble in the Jungle. Those who studied his career closely noticed a subtle evolution in his approach, a greater efficiency in his movements, a more controlled application of his devastating power. When asked about influences outside of boxing, Foreman would occasionally mention a night in a small Chinatown gymnasium where a man half his size had taught him that true power wasn't about destruction, it was about controlled. The lesson of that autumn evening transcends fighting styles and weight classes. It speaks to a truth that applies to all pursuits. Raw power without wisdom is just force. But power, combined with control, guided by understanding, becomes something greater. It becomes mastery. If this story inspired you and made you think differently about the relationship between power and control, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to understand that being strong is easy, but being strong and precise is an art. Comment below. What matters more in a fight, power or speed?